The exchange class arrives. The day the alien exchange class arrived on Earth. The sky looked calm, but the air carried a strange weight, as if the world itself was watching them step out of the shuttle. The students came from many species: tall crystal, skinned Orlans with shining eyes, soft-scaled Vurians who smelled faintly of salt, and small feathered Dracs who chirped when nervous. They had studied Earth in data files, seen pictures of green forests, blue oceans, and smiling humans, but now standing on real ground, they felt something their records had not shown, a hum beneath their feet, a pulse that matched the rhythm of their hearts. Their guide was a human woman named Lena. She was not tall or armored or glowing like some of them expected. She wore a simple jacket, heavy boots, and a smile that seemed both kind and knowing. Her eyes were the color of wet stone, and they seemed to look right through the noise of their chatter. She greeted each of them with a handshake that felt too firm and warm and said, "Welcome to Earth, please stay close, the weather can change fast." The aliens laughed softly, thinking it was a joke. How could weather be a danger when their homeworlds had storms that tore metal? They began their tour in a mountain town where the air was thin and smelled of pine and cold. The houses clung to the slopes like stubborn creatures. The students recorded everything: the soil, the strange birds, the way humans waved at them without fear. Lena told them that people here lived on farming and mining, and the mountain sometimes moved when rain was heavy. An Orlan named Sirth asked why anyone would live in a place that could fall apart. Lena only shrugged and said, "Because it is home by midday." The air changed. The wind began to hiss through the trees, and the clouds rolled in thick and gray. The aliens turned their sensors upward, but the readings confused them. Temperature dropping fast, pressure falling. Lena stopped the group by a ridge, and her tone grew firm. "Time to head down now," she said. "We have an hour, maybe less." They followed, but some grumbled that she was overreacting. Then the first snow began, not soft flakes, but hard grains that bit into their faces. Within minutes, visibility fell, and the path vanished under white. Panic flickered through the group. One of the Dracs squeaked that they should call their shuttle. Lena raised her voice over the wind. "Stay together. Follow the rope line we marked on the way up." She pulled a coil from her pack and anchored it to a rock, moving with calm, sure steps. The aliens followed, trembling. They saw her check every knot, every turn, every pair of feet. She kept her voice steady, telling them how to breathe slow and deep, so the thin air did not steal their strength. When one student slipped, she caught his arm without hesitation. After what felt like hours, they reached a cabin below. The storm roared outside, shaking the walls. Lena built a fire with practiced hands while the students huddled, trying to process what had happened. The Vurian with the sensors said that no storm should form that fast on any mapped planet. Lena only smiled faintly and said, "Earth does not like to be predictable. You respect her, or she reminds you." When morning came, the storm was gone and the world shone bright and clean. The alien stepped out and saw the mountain glowing under sunlight. The snow was deep, but the village was already moving, humans clearing paths, checking neighbors, laughing as if last night was nothing. Kiri, a small feathered student, asked Lena if this happened often. Lena nodded and said, "We learn to live with what comes, because if we waited for safety, we would never live at all." The students looked at her and at the people around them, and something in their hearts shifted just a little. For the first time they understood that Earth was not gentle, and the creatures who called it home were not weak, but shaped by challenge, by danger, by love for a wild and living world. They began to whisper among themselves, maybe the old stories were true. Maybe Earth really was a death world, lessons in a world that pushes back. The next morning the air was sharp and clean, and the mountain clouds had drifted away like ghosts vanishing in the sun. The alien students followed Lena down winding trails toward a wide green valley where a field camp waited for them. Tents stood in neat rows, and smoke from cooking fires rose into the cold air. The place looked simple, but alive, full of human motion and sound. Men and women carried tools, checked ropes, packed supplies, and spoke in calm, quick voices. A tall, quiet human named Ramos greeted them, his face lined by years of sun and wind. He said he was their instructor for the next few days, and his words were slow and steady as stone. "Today," he said, You learn how we live with the world instead of against it. The aliens gathered in a circle while Ramos showed them small things that looked ordinary. A rope, a knife, a metal flask, a bit of cloth. He said these were tools of respect that humans carried when they left shelter. He showed how the rope could be used to cross a stream or pull a friend from danger, and how a bit of dry cloth could start a fire even when the wind howled. The aliens found this curious, for on their worlds machines handled such work, yet here the humans used hands and instinct. Ramos smiled and said, "The world changes fast, and sometimes the machine is gone, and only your will remains." They set out on a short hike to test what they had learned. The valley was calm at first, sunlight soft through the tall trees. The aliens walked slow, marveling at flowers that bloomed from stone and insects that shone like bits of metal. But as they moved, deeper, the air grew heavier and the ground soft beneath their boots. A Vurian student stepped into what looked like dry dirt and sank up to his knees with a startled cry. Ramos was there at once, throwing a rope and pulling him free. The human laughed, not cruelly, but as if to say the world loves to remind us who is in charge. They pressed on, but the sky began to change again, gray clouds forming in layers above the ridges. Ramos stopped and lifted his face to the wind. He said it smelled of distant rain. The aliens checked their sensors but saw no sign of a storm. Lena only said, "The mountain carries secrets the machines cannot see." Moments later, thunder rolled from far away, and a wind swept through the trees strong enough to bend the branches. The humans moved with purpose, gathering the group, leading them toward higher ground, while the aliens stumbled confused at the sudden shift. When they reached a wide ridge, they saw the river below them swelling, as rain from unseen slopes poured down in waves. The sound of rushing water filled the air. Ramos told them this was the reason humans build high, even in places that seem calm, because peace here never lasts forever. They watched as logs and debris swirled in the river like toys, and the ground trembled under their feet. A small bridge gave way and vanished in seconds. As the rain eased, the humans led the class back to camp. The aliens were tired, wet, and quiet. They sat around the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to Ramos speak. He told them that humans had learned not to fight the world, but to flow with it, to bend without breaking. He said, "When disaster comes, we hold each other and rebuild before the ashes are cold." The aliens listened in silence, feeling something stir in them that was not fear but respect. Kiri, the feathered one, asked softly if humans ever wished to leave such a dangerous place. Ramos looked at the fire and said, "Maybe sometimes. But this world is our teacher and our home. It gives us pain, but also beauty." The best lessons are not. Gentle Varesh, who had mocked the training before, stayed silent, staring at his soaked boots. He had thought humans overdramatic, but now he saw how they worked with strength that came not from armor or claws but from steady hearts. That night the air cleared and stars filled the sky, bright and countless. The aliens lay awake, listening to the forest sounds, distant cries, rustling leaves, shifting wind. Each sound told them the planet was alive, aware, testing them. Lena walked between the tents, checking every line and light, and when she passed, she smiled at the students and said, "Sleep well. Tomorrow we meet the storm again, but not the same way, for this time you will be ready." Her words sank deep into their minds, as if carved there by the rhythm of the earth itself, and they began to understand why no other world bred a people quite like humans. The storm test. The morning began with a heavy silence that made even the birds fall quiet, and the air tasted of metal and salt, as if the sky itself was warning of something to come. The alien students woke early and found Lena and Ramos already checking the sky, their faces calm but focused. Ramos told them the heat wave had broken far to the south, and the valley would soon see the kind of storm Earth was known for. Lena gathered the class and said, "Today, you will learn what it means when humans say the world fights back." The words made the aliens uneasy, but there was no fear in her voice, only quiet certainty that they would all face it together. They began the day preparing for what Lena called a level 3 storm. The aliens helped the humans move supplies into stronger shelters, tie down equipment, and seal food containers. Ramos showed them how to secure windows and mark exits with glow tape in case of power failure. The students found it strange that humans trusted such simple materials instead of energy shields, but when they asked Lena, she said simple things do not fail when power does. The air grew darker by the hour and the sky thickened with rolling clouds that looked close enough to touch by noon. The wind had turned wild and branches snapped like brittle bones. The valley sirens howled their long warning notes and the ground seemed to tremble beneath the weight of the wind. The students followed Lena and Ramos to the community shelter, a strong stone building dug partly into the hill. Inside, people moved in organized chaos, stacking blankets, food, and medical kits. The aliens felt the tension, the smell of sweat and rain and fear mixed with something else, an energy that pulsed through every human there. It was not panic. It was determination. The storm struck with a roar that shook the walls, the wind screamed like a living thing, and the rain fell in sheets thick enough to blur the world outside. Lightning flashed again and again, turning the windows white. The aliens huddled together in awe at the fury of the world they had thought was just another study subject. Lena stood by the door, giving orders calmly. Check the lower corridor. Bring the children upstairs. Watch for leaks. Her voice carried through the noise and people listened, not because she shouted but because she was steady. Then came a cry from outside. One of the alien students, Varesh, had gone out to film the storm for his report, ignoring the warnings he had slipped into a drainage culvert where water was rising fast, and now his shouts echoed through the rain. Lena reacted without hesitation. She tied a rope around her waist and dove into the storm. Ramos grabbed the other end and shouted to the students, "Hold this line no matter what happens." They formed a chain, their hands gripping the rope while the rain pounded their backs and wind pulled at their bodies. Lena moved through the dark water and found Varesh clinging to a pipe, his eyes wide with terror. She reached him, wrapped the rope around both of them, and gave the signal to pull. The students heaved with all their strength and felt the line tighten and strain, until finally both figures emerged, soaked and shivering, but alive. Inside the shelter, Varesh coughed water and shook uncontrollably. Lena knelt beside him, her face pale but calm. She said quietly, "The world will not forgive arrogance, but it may spare those who learn." Varesh could not speak, only nodded his head as tears mixed with rain on his face. Curie brought him a blanket, and the rest of the class watched in silence, their earlier curiosity now replaced by deep respect for the strange, fierce compassion of these humans who faced death as part of daily life. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The valley lay broken trees, scattered mud everywhere, roofs torn from houses, yet humans were already outside working without pause. They cleared roads, checked on the injured, shared food, and even laughed as they worked. The aliens joined them, helping lift debris and hand out water. They saw children carrying smaller children to safety and elders giving orders with sharp, clear voices. The same people who had fought the storm were now rebuilding before the clouds were gone. That evening the class gathered as the sun returned, burning red behind the ruined hills. Ramos spoke softly, saying, "This is why we survive. Not because the world is kind, but because we are kind to each other." Lena added, "The world will always test us, but each time we stand, we grow stronger. And that is why Earth is called a death world, because only those who care enough to fight for life can live here." The aliens looked at the horizon and felt something awaken inside them. A new understanding that life here was not about strength alone, but about the unbreakable will to endure together. And they realized that they were beginning to love this fierce, unforgiving world. The coast of steel and salt. The ship that carried the exchange class to the coast glided low above the sea, while the water below turned from green to deep iron blue, and waves rose like restless beasts. The alien students watched through wide windows and felt the craft shake in the heavy wind. Lena stood at the front, steady and silent, her hand resting on a rail, while Ramos explained that the coast they were visiting had faced more storms than anywhere else on the planet. Yet humans still called it home because it was where the land met the wild heart of the sea. When they landed, the air was thick with salt and the scent of oil and wet stone. The city before them looked built from courage and memory, with tall cranes bent like patient giants and ships moored to heavy chains, their hulls marked by scars of old battles with the weather. As they walked through the harbor district, Lena told them that every scar on these ships was a story of survival. Each dent, each weld mark, each patch of rust told of a crew that refused to surrender when the sea tried to claim them. The aliens listened in silence, feeling that same hum of energy they had felt in the mountains, only stronger now, as if the ocean itself dared them to look away. Ramos led them into a building made of glass and steel that looked out over the waves. It was the Maritime Museum, filled with relics of storms gone by, twisted anchors, cracked helmets, faded photographs of rescuers and survivors. Some of the aliens shivered, seeing how fragile the humans looked in those old pictures, yet how determined their eyes remained even behind glass. In the afternoon, they joined a coastal training exercise called Operation Hold Fast. It was a drill, but everything felt real. The aliens were given orange vests and radios, while Ramos and a team of rescue workers showed them how to form teams, tie strong knots, build rafts from barrels and rope, and use hand signals when machines failed. The students struggled with the simplest tasks, their hands clumsy and unsure. But Lena was patient, correcting them with quiet gestures and steady words. When Kiri managed to tie a proper knot, the human rescuers cheered, as if she had lifted a mountain. Varesh kept to the back, working silently, ashamed of his mistake in the storm. Yet when he caught a barrel, rolling away in the wind, Ramos gave him a nod that spoke more than any praise. Later they met sailors who told stories of storms that had taken entire harbors and of rebuilding that began the next morning without complaint. A grizzled old captain named Nara said that fear never leaves you, but courage is doing the work anyway. The aliens wrote her words in their data pads, trying to understand what kind of species would choose to live beside a force that could crush them whenever it pleased. That evening, as the sun dropped red behind the horizon, the weather reports grew grim. A massive storm had changed course and was now heading straight for the city, faster than expected. The local sirens began to sound, and the calm practice became real. Lena gathered the students at once, her face serious but not afraid. She said, "This storm is not like the one in the valley. This one comes from the sea, and the sea has a long memory." Ramos told them to stay near the inland shelter, but the students insisted on helping, saying they could not learn by hiding. Lena looked at them for a long moment and then agreed, saying they would follow orders exactly or be pulled out immediately. Together they moved through the city, helping people tie shutters, lift crates to higher floors, and carry supplies to the emergency centers. The streets filled with sound and motion as humans worked side by side in perfect rhythm. By nightfall, the first gusts struck the coastline, and the rain came in waves harder than stone. The students huddled in the shelter, watching the storm climb the horizon, with lightning flashing across the sea. The water glowed white where it struck the shore, and every thunderclap shook the ground. Varesh stood by a window, gripping the frame, whispering that no world should live like this. Kiri answered softly that maybe it was not about living with safety, but about earning life through struggle. Outside the harbor, lights flickered, and the sirens turned to a single rising wail that told them the hurricane was making landfall. Lena checked her gear and said quietly to Ramos that they had done what they could, and now it was time to see who they really were. The aliens felt the ground tremble and the windows pulse with the pressure of the wind. They understood now that Earth did not forgive weakness, but it did reward courage, and they realized they were witnessing not just a storm, but the living test that had shaped humanity into what it was, a species that would stand before the sea itself and say, "We will rebuild again come morning." The night had only begun, and the world outside was roaring its challenge when the sea comes in. The night deepened until the world outside the shelter turned black and alive with sound. The hurricane had reached the city, and the roar of the wind was like an endless scream across metal and stone. The alien students could feel the pressure in their bones, and the air itself seemed to shake. The building groaned as if it were breathing. Lena stood by the door with a flashlight in one hand and a radio in the other, calm like a rock in the storm. Ramos moved among the people, checking each corner for leaks and loose panels, his voice low and steady, reminding them to breathe slow and keep their heads clear. The aliens watched these humans who faced chaos not with panic but with practice, and something inside them shifted again. A crash echoed through the hall, and a section of window frame burst open, spraying water and shards across the floor. The aliens flinched, but Lena was already there, sealing the breach with a metal plate and rope. She ordered 2 volunteers to fetch blankets and told the students to help move the older residents to the higher level. The shelter became a hive of motion, with every person finding a role, even the smallest hands working to carry supplies. The wind outside roared louder, but inside, there was order born of countless storms before. Hours passed, though it felt like days. The power failed, plunging the rooms into a dim red glow from emergency lights. The students took turns holding flashlights while Ramos repaired the generator. By feel alone, the smell of salt water filled the air and the ground trembled again. A call came through the radio. A rescue boat had been blown off course, and its engine was dead, drifting toward the rocks at the north dock. The transmission broke, with static, but the message was clear. People were out there, and they would not last long. Lena looked at Ramos and then at the class, her eyes reflecting the flicker of light. She said, "I am going to the dock. Ramos, you take command here." The students protested, but she only said quietly, "If you want to learn what it means to live on Earth, then follow me." They stepped into the storm, and the world outside was fury made real. Rain cut across their faces like whips, and water ran in rivers through the streets. The air was filled with the sound of shattering glass and bending steel. The aliens could barely see, but they followed the yellow flash of Lena's coat as she led them through the flooded streets toward the harbor. Ramos came behind, carrying rope and a first aid kit. The water was already waist-high in places, and floating debris struck their legs with every step. Kiri felt fear clawing at her chest, but seeing the humans move forward without hesitation gave her strength to keep going at the dock. They saw the faint shape of the stranded boat trapped between waves and rocks. Lights flickered weakly on its deck, and figures waved in desperation. Ramos shouted instructions that were almost lost in the wind. He tied a line to a post and threw the other end to Lena, who tied it around her waist and began to cross toward the boat. Kiri grabbed another line and anchored it with Varesh, helping her secure it around the rail. The water surged higher and higher, and the sound of the storm swallowed everything. Varesh slipped once, but Lena caught him and pulled him upright. Her strength seemed impossible for someone her size. She said, "You stand together, or you fall alone. Remember that." They reached the boat just as a wave slammed it against the rocks. A man on deck had a broken arm, and 2 others clung to the railing, their faces pale with exhaustion. Lena climbed aboard and shouted for them to move fast. Ramos formed a human chain across the dock, and the students joined arms, each gripping the next as the survivors were passed from one to another through the flood. The last man was too weak to hold the rope, and when the next wave hit, Lena was thrown into the water. The chain held, but the line snapped. Ramos dove without a word, and the students screamed her name. Kiri saw a flash of yellow under the surface and threw a coil of rope toward it. Varesh caught the other end, and together they pulled until Lena's hand broke the surface, grasping the rope tight. They dragged her out, coughing and gasping, but alive. When they returned to the shelter, the people inside cheered, though many were crying. The storm still howled outside, but for the first time the aliens felt no fear, only awe. They helped wrap Lena in blankets, and Ramos placed a hand on her shoulder, saying softly, "You always find the hardest way home." She laughed weakly and said, "Someone has to teach them right." The aliens sat in silence, watching the rain through the broken window and understanding that they had seen the true heart of humanity. Not power, not technology, but the unyielding refusal to let go of life, even when the sea itself tried to take it away. By dawn, the storm began to fade, leaving the streets covered in debris and shining under a pale sky. The humans stepped out without rest, ready to clean, rebuild, and care for those who had lost everything. The aliens followed their lead with quiet respect, knowing that no lesson in any academy could match what they had just lived through, and in their hearts the words formed without needing to be spoken. Earth is a death world, because it demands life that never gives up, and these humans have learned to meet that demand every single day. Hold the line together. The morning after the hurricane did not bring peace. The air still carried the weight of the sea, and the wind whispered warnings through the broken city. The humans were already at work, clearing roads and checking shelters, while the alien students helped carry supplies from the trucks that had survived the night. Lena was pale but steady. walking with a limp and refusing to rest. Ramos had one arm in a sling, but his voice still carried command as he directed teams toward the flooded districts. The aliens watched them and wondered how a people so fragile could keep moving, as if pain itself was only another task to complete. The sky darkened again by noon, and a new warning came over the radio, another storm front, smaller but fierce, heading toward the coast within hours. Ramos looked at Lena and said, "We cannot evacuate the low docks in time. We will have to hold them until the tide breaks." Lena nodded and called for volunteers, and before she could finish her sentence, Kiri stepped forward, her feathers slick with mist and eyes full of resolve. "I will go," she said, and Voresh followed, saying he owed this world something and would not hide anymore. The other students joined too, but Ramos told them to stay at the shelter and keep the others safe. The humans and two aliens formed the first team to move toward the docks, carrying rope flares and emergency gear as they reached the waterfront. The sea was already rising again. The air stung with salt, and the waves pounded the piers with dull, heavy blows. Ramos ordered everyone to tie safety lines from post to post, creating what he called a living bridge. Lena explained the human chain, each person linked to another by rope and by hand, so that no one faced the water alone. The aliens listened and followed every order as if their lives depended on it, because now they knew that it did. The wind picked up and the world turned gray again, but the humans did not slow. They worked with quick, sharp movements, anchoring the lines, tightening knots, and testing the structure against the pull of the tide. Soon a radio call came through from a rescue boat that had been trapped beyond the harbor. The engines had failed again, and 3 crew members were adrift near the outer breakers. Ramos clenched his jaw and said, "We will bring them in before the next surge hits." Lena checked her rope and stepped forward. Ramos tried to stop her, but she only smiled and said, "You still owe me a story about the mountains." The team crossed the flooded street to the edge of the pier, waves smashing against the beams and cold water climbing higher with every gust. The sound was so loud that shouting felt useless, but their eyes spoke for them. Courage moving through the line like current. Threw a wire liner, reached the edge, and threw a weighted line toward the stranded boat. The first throw missed, swept aside by the wind. She waited for the rhythm of the waves and threw again. This time the rope caught on the railing of the boat. The crew tied it fast and started crawling hand over hand toward the shore. Ramos gave the order to pull, and the team leaned back together. Their feet braced against the slick stone. Kiri and Voresh held the center of the chain, their muscles burning. Their hands raw, but they did not let go. A huge wave crashed over them, breaking the line between Ramos and the dock, and for a moment it seemed the sea had won. Ramos was pulled under, disappearing into the dark. Lina shouted his name, but the roar of the water drowned her voice. Kiri saw something glinting in the foam, a flash of Ramos's glove. She screamed to Voresh, and through the spare rope he caught, it swung it wide, and it found the target by some miracle. The rope went taut, and the whole team pulled until Ramos broke the surface, coughing and gasping, his face pale but alive. They dragged him up onto the dock, where Lena knelt beside him, her voice trembling for the first time, saying, "You mad fool, we do not lose anyone today." He looked at her and managed a weak grin, saying, "I knew you would say that." The storm began to ease as dawn approached, the clouds breaking into streaks of silver across the horizon. The city was quiet except for the hiss of retreating waves. The team stood, together, soaked, exhausted, and shaking. But alive. Ramos rose unsteady but proud and said, "We held the line," and the aliens repeated the words like a chant. "We held the line." The phrase spread through the crowd of workers who had watched from the shelter, and soon hundreds of voices were echoing it through the streets. When the sun rose, it found them all still standing among broken boats and torn nets. The air smelled of salt and smoke, but also of hope. The aliens looked at the humans around them and understood something that no data file could ever teach. Earth was a place where even the sea itself could not drown the spirit of those who refused to yield. And they realized that the human chain was more than a rescue trick. It was a way of life to hold each other through every flood, through every storm, through every loss, and to never let go. Why they call it a death world. The sun rose over the broken city with a strange golden calm, as if the sky itself wanted to rest after the long night of fury. The air was thick with salt and smoke, and everywhere people moved slowly but with purpose, clearing debris, pulling wrecked boats from the docks, repairing walls and power lines. The sea was quiet, now a gray mirror that hid its rage beneath the surface. The alien students stood side by side watching humans work with the same quiet strength they had shown in every trial. And they felt a weight in their chests that was not fear, but awe. Ramos walked among the workers, his arms still bandaged but his steps firm. Lena moved beside him, giving orders, smiling at the children, handing out water and checking on everyone as if she had not nearly drowned only hours before. The aliens helped wherever they could, carrying supplies, patching roofs, and translating messages for incoming rescue teams from other regions. They were no longer outsiders. They were part of the flow, part of the great rhythm that bound every human hand and heart together. The smell of food drifted through the streets as people began cooking huge pots of soup and bread to feed the workers. Laughter mixed with tears, and in every corner of the ruined city, there was the sound of rebuilding. The aliens looked around and saw something they had never seen on any other world they had visited. The humans did not wait for orders from leaders or machines. They simply acted together as if driven by one pulse, one belief that life must go on. As the day passed, the alien students met with Lena and Ramos in the courtyard of the shelter where the flag of the city hung torn but still standing. Kiri bowed slightly and said, "We have learned more in these days than in all our years of study, and we understand now why Earth is called a death world. It is not because the world kills easily, but because it forces life to fight every hour." Ramos smiled and said softly, "We call it home because we have learned to love its challenges. Its cruelty teaches us kindness. Its danger teaches us courage, and its loss teaches us the meaning of every small joy." Varesh, who had once mocked the idea of human toughness, stepped forward, his voice steady but full of emotion. He said, "On my world, storms are rare and calm is endless. We thought that peace made us wise, but now I see that struggle makes you alive. You people do not just survive, you create meaning from the very things that try to break you." He turned toward Lena and said, "When I first arrived, I thought humans were reckless. Now I know you are brave, and your bravery has no armor. It walks bare in the rain." Lena laughed softly and said, "Perhaps we are both a little right. Humans are reckless and brave and stubborn, and that is why we are still here." She looked at the alien class and continued, "You came to study us, but we have learned from you too. We saw how quickly you adapted, how you stopped fearing the unknown and started helping even when it hurt. That is what it means to belong on this planet. You give everything, and somehow you end up with more than you started." The words hung in the warm air like sunlight through broken glass. By evening, the city lights flickered back to life. Generators humming across the hills. People gathered on the beach where the storm had finally passed. The sand was wet and scattered with shells and driftwood, but the sea was calm now. Children ran along the shore, chasing birds while workers built a bonfire from broken planks. Ramos lit the first flame and the crowd cheered. The aliens stood among them, feeling the heat and the sound of waves and the heartbeat of humanity all around them. Lena raised her voice and said, "This fire is for everyone who fought and everyone who still stands. The world will test us again. But tonight, we celebrate being alive." As the fire grew brighter, Kiri whispered to Varesh, "Do you think any of us will ever see another world like this?" He shook his head slowly and said, "No. There is only one Earth, and now I know why even the stars call it dangerous. Because it is alive and because it gives birth to people who will never give up." The wind carried their words away over the waves. When the time came for the students to leave the next morning, the humans gathered at the port to see them off. The ship rose slowly above the harbor, its engines rumbling like distant thunder. Lena and Ramos waved from the pier, and the aliens pressed their hands to the glass, watching the faces below grow smaller. The city still bore its scars, but it was standing, stronger than before, and in the rising light it looked almost eternal. Kiri turned to her classmates and said, "We came to learn about survival, but we found something greater. We found spirit." Varesh added softly, "We will tell our worlds that Earth is not a death world. It is a birthplace of courage." The ship climbed higher through the clear morning sky, leaving the world of storms behind. Yet every alien on board felt that they had left a piece of themselves there on that fierce and beautiful planet, and they all understood that humanity's strength was not in weapons or power, but in their hearts that refused to kneel even before nature itself. And in that endless defiance, there was something sacred, something that would echo forever, through the stars. The ship drifted beyond the blue curve of Earth, and the alien students stared through the wide glass at the planet below, swirling with clouds and oceans and light. They could still feel the echo of the storms, the pulse of see the laughter of the people who had faced the wind and smiled back at it. Each of them was silent, lost in thought, but their hearts were full. Kiri pressed her hand to the window, whispering words that no translator could carry, and every student understood because it was not language, it was feeling. The world beneath them was not just a place of danger, it was a living teacher, a wild soul that shaped every creature that dared to walk upon it. Voresh looked at the endless blue and said softly that no star academy could ever teach what Earth had shown them. He remembered the rope in his hands, the water rushing past his legs, the moment when he thought all was lost, and yet someone still reached for him. He said, "Humans live every second, as if the universe might break and they will still find a way to laugh." Ramos had once said that pain was the proof of life, and now Voresh finally understood that lesson fully, because every bruise, every tear, every scar was not weakness. It was memory. It was proof of love. Lena stood at the dock below, watching the trail of the ship fade into the sky. The wind tugged at her coat and she breathed the scent of salt and smoke still clinging to the air. Ramos walked up beside her, his arm still in a sling and a small smile playing on his face. He said, "They will tell stories about this trip." Lena and she answered, "Let them tell the truth that we did nothing special, only what humans always do. We endure, we rebuild, we help one another until the world itself grows tired of testing us." Ramos nodded and looked out at the horizon where sunlight spilled across the waves and said, "Maybe that is why we were born here, because this world needed someone stubborn enough to love it." Down by the harbor, children were collecting shells left by the storm, their laughter rising above the soft hiss of the tide. The people were rebuilding the docks, patching boats, repainting walls, singing as they worked, and the city smelled again of life. The flag, still torn, fluttered proudly in the wind, and the sound of hammers echoed like a heartbeat. Lena watched them and felt pride not in victory, but in survival, in the quiet, unspoken strength of ordinary people who faced every dawn with open eyes and open hearts. She thought of the alien students and hoped that when they looked at the stars they would remember this small, fierce world and the stubborn species who refused to kneel before it. Far above the clouds, the alien ship turned toward the stars. The students gathered at the viewport for one last look. The earth glowed below them, green and blue and bright like a promise. Kiri whispered that the galaxy calls it a death world, but maybe it should be called the world of life, because everything on it fights to keep breathing. They all nodded, and for a long moment there was no sound, only the steady hum of the engines and the beating of hearts that had learned something eternal. The stars stretched ahead, waiting silent and endless, and behind them the planet turned in its orbit, shining like fire in the darkness, a beacon of struggle and hope and impossible beauty. And as the ship moved farther away, the students kept watching until Earth became a single point of light, still, burning defiant and alive. The end.